Welcome to Marcos and James, the Lisbon Pirates podcast. Good morning, Tiago.
Good morning, Marcos.
And listen, we've got, for the second time, a guest.
Yes.
So we want to introduce our guest.
Yes.
Our guest this morning is Philippe.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be speaking to Mark's phone.
That's right.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, as we do with all of our guests, we have to give Philippe a name.
Yes.
So, Philippe, we're going to give you a name, and
Okay.
you've already suggested a good one. So what is it going to be today?
It's going to be my name in Greek, Philippos.
Philippos.
Is that right?
Sounds great to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So today we're Marcos, James, and Philippos.
Philippos. Is it right, Philippos? Because
I
I
don't know.
didn't. It's one of the biggest mistakes of my life. When I was in seminary, I began studying Greek, but I was very mature and I didn't do it all the way. So this is our dark little secret here in Lapa. And Filipe he is one of the pastors here at Igreja da Lapa. We have 4 pastors, and Filipe is one of them.
So we've got 3 of them right here. So
Yes.
we need to call Ricardo in. Just have a-
Ricardo has to come.
yeah. So, well, good. Well, let's jump right into the
Let's go.
into the asunto, into
Yeah.
the topic for this morning. And Tiago, why don't you just tell us what the topic is, what we're going to be talking about this
Yeah,
morning?
we were thinking about talking about baptism. Last Saturday we had 2 baptisms. So Antonio and Catarina got baptized, and this is a huge party for any Christian church. Even more, I think. And I want to be fair with all our Pedo Baptist brothers, but if you believe that baptism should come out of a personal confession of faith, I think in a way it becomes even a more a bigger party to have. And so we are very happy we did this last Saturday, and we wanted to talk a little bit about this. And Mark, let me make you a question.
Sure.
Why do we dunk people? Is it right
Yeah.
to say dunk
Yeah,
people?
dunk them in the water.
Yes. Why do we do that? Why don't we just sprinkle?
Complete immersion.
Yes,
Yeah.
complete immersion, 100%. Why do we do that?
Well, I think the first answer is essentially because Jesus was completely immersed, and I think if we had a lot of time, we could go back even into the Old Testament text and look at kind of what God set up for some of the ritual purification, and that would be very interesting. We don't have time this morning to do that, but that would be something interesting to talk about. But I think the first thing we have to recognize is that Jesus was fully immersed by John the Baptist when he was baptized, and so because of that, following his example and what he told us to do to go and baptize, we do the same.
But isn't it some kind of being over? I don't know if this makes sense, but having a very strict sense of the formality of getting people wet. Why not just a sprinkle? It's the same idea. Are we being too strict in our way of understanding baptism? What do you think?
No,
about
absolutely
that?
not. And I'll let Philippe answer here too. But yeah, absolutely not. I think it's not being overzealous. It's not taking it to the extreme. I think it's something traditionally that we've seen over the years through the church as practicing believers and the practice of full immersion. And so it's something that's supported not only by Scripture, and I think that's the first thing we go to is Scripture, but then secondly, it's supported by the tradition of the church, the historic Christian church, all across the age since the beginning of the church. So Philippe, weigh in here. What do you think?
Going back to the Bible again, I think the strongest image is that one of Paul, I think in 1 Corinthians, when he says we are baptized in Jesus' death. So in order to represent that fully, we need to be dunked all the way from top to bottom.
Yeah.
So I think it's the strongest image is that, and only a full tank of water is going to do the job. So
it's like a choreography then, right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
Yes. Could you detail just step by step what's the choreography about?
So when the person who is about to get baptize is going to be immersed in the water.
Yeah, immersed into the water.
Immersed in the water. He's representing his death with Christ on the cross, and when he's bringing up again, he's representing his resurrection with Christ. So
Yeah,
that's what
representation in
So
life.
that means that if you just sprinkle, you lose the strength of this message.
I think you will lose pretty much most than 50% of the message, because you I don't see how you can spot the death and resurrection scene if you just sprinkle with water. That just doesn't happen. That's what I teach the kids. We baptize them because Jesus died and Jesus resurrected, and that's what happened to us spiritually. So in a physical way, that's what happens.
Yeah,
when we
and
baptize.
I would argue that God intentionally left us in the church two very distinct ways to physically show the gospel, and so baptism is one of them, and I would argue that communion is the other. That the two things that the church uses to represent physically or tangibly even what the gospel is, and so I think that's exactly what Philippe is saying, is such an importance of the full immersion of being the representation of what the gospel means, and that's the death and resurrection of Jesus and how we enter into that with him in new life.
But that's great, Mark. But isn't our faith about our conscience, about what happens inside of us? So aren't those kind of material things not that necessary?
And isn't it interesting that it has to be? And I believe that that's why over the years baptism has always been public. It's not something that you do in your bathtub at home by yourself. Baptism has always been done publicly and with the church. And so in that sense, and that's maybe a question I have for you guys this morning, is all over the world and it's been an argument probably ever since the church has started, but it's this idea of, can you get baptized outside of the church?
Oh.
And so you have these situations where people oh, there's water, let's go baptize them, but then it's not done under the authority of the church.
Yes.
Well,
and so it's a huge question.
Yes, if you put it really simply, I think you would have to think of Matthew 28 when Jesus says he spreads his disciples to preach the gospel and to baptize. So he was sending his church. He was not sending random people. He was sending the church to baptize. So I think we cannot do it outside of the church. But then again, it's a difficult question. But I would say that if I had just 5 seconds to answer the question.
And one of the things that I think sometimes it's not that helpful for us is that living in a so much conscious-oriented culture, we tend to think everything coming from our grasp on things.
Right.
So even with baptism, this is something that we teach people when we are preparing them to get baptized in this church. And generally, the first lesson is this: the more important person in the day of your baptism is not you, but is Jesus.
That's right.
Of course, as Baptists, as credo Baptists, Christians that believe that baptism should come with a personal confession of faith. That's why we don't baptize babies. Exactly. As Baptists, of course, we give value to our personal conscience about baptism, because people that will be baptized, it's only people who decided to do that. But this doesn't mean that what we are celebrating is your personal conscience.
Right.
Of course, that's involved in the process. And so trying to answer your question, Mark, sometimes I believe that one thing that gets difficult nowadays is that people think mostly baptism as something that belongs to me. And it's true, but there's more truth
Yeah.
about that, that belonging only to you, and so belongs to the church, like Philip was
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
It's the disciples, they were called to baptize.
I actually loved what Antonio and Caterina said after their baptism. They said it happened so quick that they didn't really have time to really think
Yeah,
and process
yeah,
it. And I
exactly.
actually said that might be a really awesome thing because it goes back to what you said, Tiago, of focusing on who the most important person is during that. So during that process, when wow, that just happened so quick, and I wasn't super aware of it.
Yes,
It's good to be reminded the most important person in this is glorifying Jesus Christ
yes.
and giving him honor and glory for the life that has been changed as a process of representation of what
Yeah.
baptism is.
Yes.
From a personal perspective, that was what helped me. That's what helped me feeling feeling more comfortable with the idea that I was baptized at the age of 13.
Okay.
And I throughout the years I've struggled uh, w- with the question of whether or not
Yes.
was I prepared.
Yes,
And
exactly.
today I have a more comprehensive grasp of
Yeah.
what baptism means, and what Tiago and you just said. It gives me a lot of peace within, because I know it's not about mostly of what I can understand when I am getting baptized, but it's about what Jesus did, and
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
he's the most important
Yeah.
important person in that time in the water. So
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's such a great reminder, for not only us, but then also for the church, isn't it? And I think that's what happened on Saturday when we baptized Antonio and Caterina. It was a representation of the gospel to our church. So let me ask you guys, what kind of an impact does that have on the church, on our church, our evangelical Baptist church here in Lisbon, Portugal?
Great question. I would say that knowing that evangelical Christians in Portugal are a very small minority. If you grow up in an evangelical church in Portugal, it's easy to mistake church with your family, with the people that you grew up knowing in your church, and so there's a very familiar environment in evangelical churches, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But then when you have people coming from the outside, like Antonio and Catarina, and getting baptized, you remember, oh, this is even bigger than my evangelical Portuguese experience. This is about God calling sinners. And even if I think that it was very natural for me to get baptized at 14,
Right.
in my case, I remember, no, it was not that natural. God called me.
Yeah.
I was a sinner also. I was a sinner growing up in church, but I was a sinner. So watching Antonio and Catarina getting baptized, in my case, even baptizing them, it reminded me this is about what God is doing all over the world. So I cannot equate my evangelical experience in Portugal with everything that happens when someone is baptized. This is go much beyond than my Portuguese experience. So it's a universal thing that happens when you baptize someone.
Absolutely.
I think it's also a countercultural thing, because we tend to idolize our minds and our conscience. So in the way we are saying that our conscience and all the things that we can think about, that's not the most important thing about us.
Yeah.
So as we have learned with James K. Smith, we're not thinking things. We need to get a more deeper grasp of our hearts, of our guts, of what Christ is doing in us, because that's the most important thing. Christ not only changes our minds, he changes our hearts as well, our feelings and our emotions towards him. And with baptism, that's a countercultural thing, because we're saying, hey, people, this is not mostly about us. This is what Christ did for us. So it's a huge thing, actually. It's
And what I've even found in this culture as well, you mentioned it being
Yeah.
countercultural. I think it is just in general,
Yeah.
just in every society.
Yeah.
This is a radical thing that believers do. But I think even in this society, in a predominantly Catholic culture, this is what I would call a marking in the sand,
Yeah.
or a saying, "My allegiance is now with Jesus Christ."
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is hard for Portuguese people to do, isn't that right?
Yeah.
To claim, to stake their allegiance with Jesus
Yes.
through baptism.
Yes.
And so why do you think that is in this culture so difficult for people to say, yes, I'm with Jesus?
I don't want to get. It's easy for me to get very trying to make these anthropological
Yeah.
distinctions. You guys know how I work and how I get excited about that kind of distinctions. But the American culture, because of the echoes of the Reformation in the building of America as a country, even thinking about baptism, of course, being a radical thing, but it's being, in a way, it can be portrayed in a secular mindset as some kind of personal improvement. And personal improvement is a big thing for American
Yeah,
people.
that's right.
In Portugal, it's different because when you think about faith, you're not so much thinking about believing. You are more thinking about belonging. In terms, you belong to the Catholic Church even if you don't believe what the Church believes. In Portugal, this is a common thing.
Yeah.
That's why you're right. If you get baptized in an evangelical church in Portugal, it's even
it's
more.
huge.
Yes.
Yep.
It's huge.
Because you have, in a way, you have to strip down for your from your national identity,
Right.
and it's huge. Yes, it's huge.
Yeah, and I think baptism across all cultures has the same significance. But I've noticed here that when people do make that decision to be baptized, it really means that they are a disciple of Jesus, that they are following hard after Jesus Christ. And I think that's so great because from my culture, from American culture, there's lots of times when we see people get baptized and it really doesn't mean anything to them.
Okay.
And it's a cultural thing to do because it's popular or it's what's expected of you.
Yes.
And so it's interesting to me that I even learned from my brothers and sisters here in Portugal to see how baptism is one of those commitments that means something and is not just a cultural identity.
We have to wrap up, Flip, because you're the guest here. We try always to pick this over the top titles.
That's right.
So
Sensationalism, sensationalist titles. Or something.
So what would you
Call this podcast?
Yes.
Oh, maybe baptism is not what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not But try to think a very. Try to
More over the top. Okay.
Yeah, try to call our listeners stupid title.
Well, our former listeners at that.
Well, I would I don't know, maybe baptism will end your life, something like that.
Yeah. Something
Anything
like
to
that.
do with death or skulls.
Yeah, it's always
or,
good.
Yes.
Yes,
Always good.
and we already called one of our podcasts "You're Gonna Die." And
Right,
one
yeah,
is
yeah,
for
yeah.
pigs, and
Yeah.
so we are trying to.
We'll come up with a good one, I promise.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap this one up and just say that here at Lapa, we love to talk about all kinds of things, and baptism is what gets us super excited. So
Yes.
we'd love to talk about baptism with you, whether it be in response to this podcast or as a part of just who we are as our church, as our community of faith here. So you're welcome to come and talk with us about what this means to follow Jesus, but also to follow him in obedience in baptism as well. So, all right, final word, Tiago?
Oh, come to our church, 11:30 every Sunday, and 5 p.m. the last Sunday of the month, and we are going to have still one of these English-speaking services. So it would be great to have you.
Yeah. We'll see you at Lapa.
Yes. God bless you.